welcome back to the True to Form podcast. I am your host, Audrey Neff, and I have two very awesome people with me who are today's two featured guests, who is Patrick Tighe, who is the founder and CEO of Coverwell, and Kandis Hughes, who is the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer of Coverwell. They are two amazing people. We were just having dinner together in Palm Beach, I think, last week, actually. So it's funny how fast time flies. I feel like I was just with you all. But they're two amazing people. I'm really excited for today's episode because the theme is going to be all around protecting your practice credibility and patients from adverse events. So it's definitely a super critical topic for the industry. I know we're going to be getting so many pearls of wisdom and just, Pat and Kandis bringing their expertise to the table in this episode. But before we jump into today's topic, I always love our guests to give a little bit of background. So Pat, we'll start with you and then we'll move over to Kandis. Just a little background of yourself and your journey to kind of what landed you here today.
Oh, thanks, Audrey. I appreciate it. We had a lovely dinner last week. Thank you for joining us. So my experience is I have a long history of insurance background, risk management. I went to Villanova University undergraduate. I was an athlete there and actually hurt my shoulder pretty badly my senior year, and I was going to need a shoulder replacement. And that's when I kind of really learned about like when you get hurt or when you have an adverse event and the need for insurance, and if you have insurance and how it changes the trajectory of what your healing will be, how you're going to deal with it. Because when I was 22, they told me I needed a full shoulder replacement. I really just felt I was too young to do that. So I did some physical therapy and kind of managed the pain and dealt with it. And then after I was out of college and I was working on my own, I was 24, I really had to do something for my shoulder. And I was no longer on my parents' insurance. I was on my own insurance. And I kind of got the real like cold bucket of water on me about how expensive these things are and how you really have to deal with it on your own. And that kind of put me on the trail of awareness. And then my trajectory of being an adult in the world, I worked for State Farm Insurance, and I was a claims adjuster handling claims for people. They taught me how to read the policy and understand what policies cover. Then I went to law school, and after being in law school, I opened up my own practice. In the last 22 years, I've helped people who are involved in accidents, slip and falls, car accidents, adverse events at med spas, things like that. And what happened to me personally was that we had an event and my wife had an adverse reaction to a procedure that she had, and it kind of presented itself. And this lifelong experience of dealing with injuries, adverse events, and insurance and how they interact kind of brought us to a place where we created Coverwell.
Yeah, love it. And we'll definitely take a deeper dive into it because I definitely want to get in the backstory of what happened to your wife. But Kandis, we're going to move to you next. So brief intro, just so our listeners can kind of get a little bit of background for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Audrey. So my background, I come from the consultative and advisory world, and that is industry agnostic. So over the last 12, 13 plus years, I lose track now, I've been working with businesses really just to help them scale and grow. So what a lot of people don't think about is, let's say you are a med spa owner or you have an aesthetic clinic. You are an absolute subject matter expert at your craft, but then there's the entire business acumen side of it. So through my trajectory of the different types of businesses I've worked through, different industries, different spaces and sizes, anywhere from a $2 million business pre-revenue or all the way up to surpassing 250 million plus, it's always coming back to what is that service you're providing? What is the solution that you're extending out there to those whom you're servicing, and really helping people move above and beyond where they ever thought that they could. So when I was introduced to Patrick and the Coverwell team, after stepping away from the firm I had been with for 12 plus years, what reinvigorated me and where my true passion lies is just doing good and helping people. And when you look at Coverwell, and as we get more into it, you're going to see it's multifaceted, because at the end of the day, unless the end consumer, which is the patient in this scenario, isn't winning, then nobody is. So not only are we here to do what we love, which is to extend something that does not exist out there anywhere else, we're helping these businesses, the med spa aesthetic space, continue to strengthen its credibility, and we're also helping the patient. So it's everyone doing good for each other, and that's what really attracted me to Coverwell and why I'm here. Blessed to be a part of
Yep.
it.
I love it. And I love what you said. I wrote it down specifically, which was you like just doing good and helping people, which I think is awesome because that's definitely what Coverwell does. And just knowing you guys on a personal level as people, that's just certainly how you guys are as well. And so if we build on that now, and obviously we'll get into what Coverwell does, but obviously there's almost a lack of education around a lot of these different things in the industry that are inevitable. So I think it's really, really crucial for practices to understand, how can you actually protect your business from adverse events? And when we look at adverse events, I mean, these things can happen for a multitude of reasons. There's so many things behind the scenes that a practice can do incorrectly that can lead to this, or it could be something on the patient side as well. So if we look at actually, let's go back a step too. So because Pat, and then we'll get to this. Pat, you talked a little bit about how the MO behind all of this came because something actually happened to your wife. So, and when that happened, you obviously firsthand saw the gap that was missing in the industry. So I think it'd be cool if you could actually share that story of what happened with your wife and how that actually, you know, was able to be the foundation of the birth of Coverwell.
Yes, that's so back in 2011, my wife was interested in getting some cosmetic work done, some aesthetic work on her lips. It was like permanent lipstick is and me as the layman, what she told me she was getting done, permanent lipstick. And of course, she's an informed consumer. She did her research. She read all the Yelp reviews. She read all the Google reviews. She asked her friends. She asked her family. And she found the very best person from her research who does this type of aesthetic procedure. And that person happened to be in Manhattan. I'm not going to name specifically where or who it was, because what happened to my wife is really indicative of what happens at spas all over the country. It's not unique to the one that did this with my wife. So she had the permanent lipstick done on her lips, and they went too deep. Some of the spots looked like she had freckles on her lips, and they were supposed to be perfectly, lovely the way lipstick makes your lips look. So you can imagine that she has this done, and we're up in New York because we live in South Florida. So we're up in New York having this done. And then, the first 2 days afterwards, she had some swelling and you really couldn't tell. So we returned to Florida, and then we're in Florida, and now she realizes she has this adverse reaction or adverse event going on in her lips. And it's very upsetting, terribly upsetting for her. So I asked her to call the spa. I said, well, call the med spa. They're going to tell you what to do. Obviously, you're their client. They're going to work with us. And she called and left a message, and she called and left another message. And then after like 3 or 4 days, we got the feeling we weren't going to be called back. So I looked to my resources and found a board certified plastic surgeon down here in Florida. We went to him, and he said, yeah, this is an adverse event. This is something we can fix. I can do some laser therapy and maybe hit it with a little bit of steroid injection and, change it. And it's not going to be perfect. It's kind of like, when you write on a piece of paper with a pencil and then you erase it with an eraser. That paper is not the same. You won't see the lead there anymore, but it's altered. So we did that, and then she got a very good result. It's almost completely gone. Of course, she can see it, and I know where it is, but it's a very good result. And then Dr. Cap, who's my co-founder, the plastic surgeon who did this treatment, he charged me for it. He's a doctor. He's got to get paid. So I asked him to take my health insurance, and he says, I wish I could, but because your wife had an elective aesthetic procedure and she signed a waiver, health insurance isn't going to cover this. So I had to come out of pocket for a few $1,000s to pay to fix this. So that was upsetting enough, and the whole experience was upsetting. It cost a lot of money to fly to New York. It cost a lot of money to get the treatment done. And then it was upsetting to have the treatment not done correctly. And then ultimately we had to undo the treatment so that, we couldn't just leave the stuff that worked. We had to get rid of the whole treatment. So, remediating that was a big expense and a lot of concern. It was upsetting. So Dr. Kapp and I put our heads together. We said, wow, this is really a place in medicine where there isn't a safety net. There's no product out there that could cover this. And what we felt was that, and what we learned from my wife's and my experience, is that there's a lot of emotions tied to making a decision on getting an aesthetic procedure. And it's a very emotional, personal decision because you're having your most vulnerable spot worked on. You're making the spot aware. This is the part of my appearance that I'm most vulnerable and that I really want to fix. I want to change this. So you're really exposed when you go in and get the treatment. And then on top of it, when there's an adverse event by no one's fault, we're not blaming this spa in New York that this happened. It just happened. You have to deal with it. But many spas, will put their head in the ground and act like nothing happens. So that's really the fruition of how this came about, because it's a statistical reality. People are going to get adverse events. They're going to have complications. But what are we doing to support them when that happens? Because it's so upsetting. It's emotionally so charged. And what we want to do, and what our whole idea is, we want to put the customer and the spa on the same side of the table. They both want the best outcome, and they don't want to be adverse to each other. And that's what Coverwell allows them to do, not be at odds.
Yeah, and I thank you for sharing the story, Pat. And just like you said, it is so, like, aesthetics, cosmetics, anything that's elective, it is super emotional. Especially for, not that men don't get emotional about it too, but it's a predominantly female patient base in this space, and women are naturally a little more emotional than men, for sure. But it is so, I'm just putting myself in your wife's shoes, and I know if that would have happened to me, I would have been just so insanely upset. So I can't even imagine, what happens when you pay all this money, you fly somewhere, you get a procedure done, and then something happens, something that you don't expect to happen. And then you have to spend more money and stress and time and energy and effort to fix the problem. So if we build on this story now, and just like you said, it happens. And instead of burying your head in the ground, which some practices certainly do, how do we be proactive around this and ease consumers and patients' minds in this industry, and not only protect our business from that standpoint, but also just make it, or perhaps drop down barriers to entry for consumers that are perhaps on social media, see horror stories of things that are happening in the industry. We all know that social media is really good for the industry, but it can also do some damage for the industry as well. So and Kim will, Kandis, I said Kim because I know Kim is there in the room with you, even though I can't see her. I know she's there. Kim is another amazing person at Coverwell too. Their whole team is awesome. So Kandis, if we go into, because there's obviously so many reasons how an adverse event can happen. So whether it's improper patient screening, lack of standardized protocol, poor communication, what are some of the biggest things that you typically see?
Absolutely. Well, and I can speak also from experience. I'm a patient. I've had various procedures done over the years, and your face is always one of those things where, like we've been speaking to, it's a very massive step to do anything, even if it's non-invasive. And so when I look back at what had I wished I had in place, or, just the type of treatment, because I've been very much so working alongside the medical space, whether it be in hearing care, whether it be in dental, and even in the aesthetic space. Setting the right patient expectations, I feel, is something that is so overlooked. Not necessarily intentionally either. I don't feel like anyone whom is in any type of medical profession, they're there to help, right? And so that's not what I'm saying at all. But what it is especially when you want a certain outcome and you have patients bring in pictures, like I myself did, to say, this is what I would like it to look like on myself. am I really taking into account how that could look on me, right? Whether it be the ratio, my jawline's different than maybe other people's. There's just so many little things. And so that setting the right expectations through proper education versus maybe going in and feeling like, and I can say this again from me having gone into a med spa for the first time, sitting down in the chair just to get Botox, but feeling like I was a number. I didn't know what type, there's different types of Botox and fillers that you can get. It was a very unknown world to myself. And I actually didn't end up going through with the procedure because I felt like I was asking more questions to educate myself than I was proactively being educated around. So going back to what you said, Audrey, with lacquered standardized protocol, and making sure you have accurate communication and you're getting informed consent from patients. Again, I don't feel anyone's doing it on purpose. It's just easy things that when you get caught up in your day to day, as all of us do in whichever profession we're in, sometimes the most important components of that interaction, they go missed. So that's one thing we see. And, something that we've been talking a lot internally about is from a patient screening perspective, you never know what that patient, such as myself, is bringing in the door with me because I'm not bringing my medical charts. You don't know what practice or clinic I went to prior. You don't know the level in which the different, services are providing, treatment plans, or the actual substances being used or quality. So how do we help protect the businesses as well as much as the patients with, again, you may inherit things that no one intentionally did, but it is something that you need to deal with. So it's thinking outside the box as well and knowing how lowly regulated the space is now. I know Pat has continued to say time and time again, and it's becoming more and more apparent, the regulations will come. You see so many, you look at the space in general, how much it's grown. You have a lot of RNs who are going out and opening their own businesses. The training and speed to become a business owner is getting a little bit diluted in some cases. And so how can you, whether you're maybe unknowingly inheriting a patient walking through your door whom is bringing something you didn't know, just making sure you're protected, your business is protected, your practitioners and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. Pat, what would you add to that?
I would add something that happened to me, Audrey. I don't know if you're aware, but I was actually on semaglutide a year ago, and unbeknownst to myself, I had diverticulitis, which is a gastro tract disease that I didn't know I had. I had been under regular care, my primary care physician. I had all my blood work up to date. I was an appropriate candidate for the Ozempic because my BMI was a little bit high. But I didn't have high blood pressure. I didn't have any problems. I was what I thought was the picture of health. And the teaming Ozempic with my diverticulitis, which nobody knew I had, shut down my gastro tract to the point where it perforated. My intestines exploded and I almost died. I was hospitalized for 9 days. And that's something that nobody did wrong. There was nobody that could prevent that from happening. I was unaware of my medical history. My primary care physician was unaware of my medical history. And the people that prescribed me the Ozempic, it was name brand Ozempic. It just was a catastrophic thing. It slowed down my gastro tract and I almost died over it. Luckily, I survived. And now that's something that actually Coverwell, we offer to people that do the semaglutide. But it's a good example because I was thorough as somebody, Coverwell was already around when I went on Ozempic. And peptides wasn't something we were considering even covering. And I had such a catastrophic event happen to me, such a bad adverse event, that it really opened my eyes to all this other stuff because you can do every single thing right and still have a catastrophic adverse event. And I don't mean to scare anybody out there, but it's just the statistical reality. And that's why we keep data so that we can, predict what may happen in the future and prepare for it.
Yeah. And it's so crazy to just think about, like, because when we think about adverse events, we always think of aesthetics or cosmetics. And in the wellness space, which we all know how fast the wellness and medical weight loss and peptides and hormone therapy, that vertical is growing just as fast, honestly. And it's been around for a while. It's just now finally getting coupled into the aesthetic industry. So I think it's crazy first of all, I think it's crazy that happened to you. I mean, thank God that you are okay and that you're here with us today, because that is just so insanely scary to think you're just going to go on Ozempic, you're going to lose some weight, and then this whole other thing happens and your life is literally at risk. So hearing that story is just crazy. I just cannot believe that happened. And so if we go through, like, what are, from your guys' standpoint, because you guys are obviously experts on this, you've dedicated, your time, your energy, your investment into growing the industry in a safer way, because just like Kandis, you mentioned, the industry is growing really, really fast. And with that will come more regulation. Because the industry has been growing, double-digit compound annual growth rate, and it's not slowing down, it's speeding up for sure. It puts the industry almost under a little bit of like a spotlight in terms of regulators and compliance and legal, medical board, all of these things. I feel like when an industry is blowing up like aesthetics and elective medicine and wellness it definitely puts a spotlight on it. And bad actors can ruin it for a lot of people, and people doing things the wrong ways or just totally neglecting the whole adverse events or complications and how to effectively manage that. If that keeps happening, it's going to result in an over-regulated industry that will just hinder growth for everybody. So like, it's not like it's just, it just affects a practice here, a practice there. It will affect the entire industry and stunt growth of it overall, and make it harder for people to do business, make it harder for RNs or NPs or whatever their medical credentials are to open up an own business. Obviously, it varies on a state-by-state basis. So what would be some of your biggest like pieces of advice that you would, if a practice is listening to this, because I'm sure a lot of practices are listening, they're like, oh, I'd never really put a ton of thought into this. And yeah, it happens. I recognize that. What are some pieces of advice that you would give them to like at least start doing things the right way?
I'll go first, Kandis. I would say that you want to protect your patients from themselves, right? So I believe we've been in the industry for over 2 years actively, and without exception, everyone I meet in the aesthetic space has the best intentions, and they want the best outcomes for their clients, and they want the best experience for the people that come into their practices. What they don't understand, well, maybe they do understand, but what I would like to remind them of is that patients, the customer, when they come in, they are very hyper focused on what they want, and they are going to say whatever they need to say to get what they want. And they may even spa shop. Someone may see something on Instagram and decide that's how they want to look. And if they go to 3 or 4 spas that refuse to do it because whatever reason, it's dangerous, it's too much, it wouldn't look right. The spa, in their experience, understands that what the client wants isn't going to make the client happy and isn't going to give them what they want. That client's going to keep going to spas until somebody says yes. So how do you smoke that out from a client? I think you got to ask them many, many questions. Have you consulted with another spa for this treatment? Is this a procedure that you've had before? How long have you been looking at it? Have you done your research? Really dig down on the interview with the patient to get to know them. Because if they're in their 4th or 5th spa, they're not going to answer those questions. They're going to realize what you're doing, and that's the filter you need to do to protect the patient from themselves and to protect your spa from that patient. That would be the number one piece of advice I would give.
Would you add anything to that, Kandis?
I couldn't agree more with that. One thing that I also hear a lot, and this is not just in the aesthetic space, this is coming from the thousands of businesses I've worked with over the last decade. Something, and let's just use this for the sake of an example, like an adverse reaction event outcome that is not a worry today, doesn't mean it needs to be a worry tomorrow. So by having proactive measures in place, it's not just to strengthen your credibility and reliability when regulations heavier do come inevitably. It's being able to not act when the chaos hits. So how can you have some type of controlled chaos and a solution and an answer that's already there versus having to go search for one when you're trying to fight the fire? It's the biggest mistake I see business owners do is, oh, we're not worried about that right now, or, oh, we haven't ever experienced this, and I know I have the top providers, in our market. It's going back to everything that was discussed by Pat. You can have the healthiest patient who has never had an adverse reaction, whom, did everything right. They did all their research, and you are, let's just say, one of the best practitioners, injectors in the space. It just doesn't matter at the end of the day because all of our DNA is different. And so how can you control the controllable ahead of time for things that are outside of our control inevitably when something like that happens, but know that you're giving yourself the peace of mind alongside that of the patient, that people shouldn't be running away from the fact that, oh, patients don't have adverse reactions, because a lot of the data isn't reported because it isn't regulated. And I can tell you, just in my sphere and circle of individuals, including myself, I've had my cousin go and get eyelash extensions, wake up the next morning and her eyes couldn't open because she was allergic to the glue. Who would have known that? Nobody. And how terrifying. You wake up and you can't see. I mean, it's just, there's story after story that I've personally been surrounded by that they do happen. And in that particular situation, she didn't go back to that spa and she didn't report it. She went to a physician to try and figure out how to get it taken care of, and now will never endure that again. So I just would encourage people to think about, maybe it's not what's happening in your practice, but what are you seeing and what are you surrounded by in which others have, gone through an experience, because it is there and it is happening. Just because we don't have the data, at some point we will. And what better than to know that, oh, we're one of the, few in our market who can differentiate ourselves this way.
Yeah. And on the topic of like whether it's a complication or an adverse reaction, whatever it may be, and it's interesting because I have a very, very good friend of mine who's a facial plastic in the space, and she's become like the complication queen of her local market, that when complications happen to patients, they're referred to her. And she's constantly receiving, whether it's threads, filler, you name it. Threads is a big one. She gets a lot of PDO thread complications. And, the people that are even referring to her, a lot of them are really, really good surgeons or really, really good providers and things like that. So instead of thinking that, some practices can think like they're invincible and we're so great, we have the best injectors, this isn't going to happen to us. If you've been in this industry long enough, you will have a complication at some point in time or an adverse reaction. I feel like it's really, really inevitable. Any provider that has been doing aesthetic medicine for years and years and years will absolutely agree with that. So it's a matter of, these things are going to happen. Like, instead of just thinking that they're not, just come to the reality that they will happen. So, okay, we know it's going to happen. Let's put in all the processes that we possibly can, from a consultation process, from a patient screening process, and then what is the process if this does happen. So let's start with, like, and Pat, you already talked about this, but screening the patient, you said, was really, really critical. What are some other things that you would advise practices do in the consultation, whether it's about, because obviously in a consultation, the majority of providers probably aren't educating about the potential risk of complications or things like that because they think it will scare the patient in not getting treated. So how would you speak to that?
Standard, best practice is to make them aware. I mean, it's as unfortunate as it can be. I think that the best practice is to educate them, and then educate them like my partner, Dr. Cap, does. He says, 1 in 10,000 people will have an adverse reaction to a breast augmentation, right? But for you, it's different. It's 50-50. It's either going to happen or it's not going to happen. I don't have 900 or 9,999 other people getting breast augmentations at the same time you're getting yours. So the statistics are a little skewed because you're not 1 in 10,000. For you, it's 50-50. But what he does say is, my practice doesn't have them. If they do have them, this is how we handle it. And you just want to educate the customer to the point where they understand the whole process. And that's the nature of an informed consent. And that is a regulation that we have in place, and that's kind of a free market regulation, because you would be really exposed if the client never signed the informed consent or the waiver. So you have to do that. So it's not like you're bringing up a topic that isn't brought up in every single procedure that's done. You just want to pay a little bit more attention. And at the end of the day, when a person has an adverse reaction, they want to be heard, they want to be valued, and they want to understand that they're not alone. And I think that starts at the informed consent. That relationship you are instilling in that client. We're going to be here if one of these awful things happen. We don't think they're going to happen, but you need to be aware it's a possibility.
Yeah. What are some, so if because you touched on it a little bit, patients want to be heard and valued if something happens. And going back to that story with your wife, like you said, she was calling and calling and no one was even getting back to her, which is just horrible client or patient care, first of all. That's extremely alarming. But when we go through, if something happens, what are some processes that you would advise, whether it's follow-up, aftercare, things like that? What are some processes that you would advise practices to ensure that they have implemented and executed in their practice in the case something does happen?
Well, truthfully, whether it happens or not, I think you got to touch the client. The day after, within 48 hours after they have a procedure done, somebody from your practice should reach out to them and just check in. How are you doing? Get their pulse. Find out if there's anything that concerns them. And then you're proactively calling them. They're not calling you loaded, being like, oh, I spent my money. They did the procedure. They don't even care what's going on with me. So I would implement kind of a plan for contacting the patient after they have the procedure. That way you're already engaged. And if something starts, you can really get ahead of it. And getting ahead of it a lot of times is just a simple education process, because no matter how experienced the customer is in the med spa world or the aesthetics world, they haven't had the procedure done as many times as the person doing the procedure. The person doing the procedure understands, you know what, when I put a needle in your face, you might have an edema, you might have some bruising, you might have some redness. But a client, when they go in, they don't understand that that's going to happen, and they need to be educated about that. And that's the proactive conversation that happens after the procedure.
Yeah. And I very much agree. It's checking in with patients. And I'm curious around how many of our listeners ask yourselves, when we have patients coming in, whether it's a super simple treatment or a laser treatment, is there a process in place of just calling every patient the next day after they receive treatment, just asking them how they're doing? My provider has done that, and it makes you feel like they remember you, they care about you, all of these things, and it doesn't take a lot of time. It's just, it takes an extra 30 seconds to make the phone call, maybe a minute max. Even if it's a voicemail and they leave a voicemail and then you listen to the voicemail, that still makes you feel a lot better from a patient perspective too, instead of just almost like ghosting the patient and you treated them, you got the money, and now it's all right, see ya. So whether it's, reaching out to them the day after, setting follow-up appointments as well. A lot of practices do that. Whether if it's tox, for instance, my injector, she does typically, 2 to 3 week follow-up, and I come in, she looks at everything. She makes sure everything is good. If I need some tweaks here and there, she just includes that. That's her model of her practice. She just includes that. I'm not paying anything extra for it. So I think that there's a lot of additional things that practices can implement to just, put patients' minds at ease, but also just make them feel a lot more comfortable. And the cool thing that comes around with all of these things, there's a trickle benefit, is you're just developing a better relationship with the patient too. And if you develop better relationships with your patients, they're typically going to refer you more business. So everything just has a direct correlation to each other. But it all comes back to how you're handling the initial consultation. Are you effectively educating the patient? Are you getting ahead of social media crazes that go on where something happens and then it's blown up over TikTok and Instagram and it totally freaks people out. Like, how do you get ahead of that and be proactive about that and as well? And actually, I believe I remember I was talking to you guys. Oh, it was in Vegas at the Med Spa show, and I remember someone asked something around the question of like, well, I'm scared to educate people on complications because I feel like it's going to make them not want to move forward with treatment. And in my and I'm a younger millennial aesthetic patient, but from my perspective, I would actually value and trust that practice a lot more if they educated me on that versus someone that was trying to shy away from it or not even talk about it. So when there's pushback, and I'll let you guys speak to this, but when there's pushback around, oh, I don't want to educate them on this because I feel like it'll make them not move forward with treatment, I see it as, oh my gosh, if this provider is implementing all of these extra steps to make myself more safe and all of these different things, and they're educating me properly, they have a protocol in place, they have a solution such as Coverwell, like I almost see that as a unique differentiator and a unique selling proposition that practices can implement, because not many practices are doing that right now. So what would anything that you guys have to add around that?
I'm sorry, Kandis. You laid it out great, Audrey. It's you want to really get close to your patient. And how do you get close to the patient? You're, as the spa, being vulnerable to them. You're saying, look, these are the potential adverse events that can happen with XYZ procedure. But we care about you so much, we have these protocols in place. And I think that's kind of where you're drawing them in. You're saying, I care about you so much, I'm going to be vulnerable with you. I'm going to tell you the potential problems with this procedure that you want to pay me to do, but I don't want to do it until you really understand what potentially could be a downside.
What we've been describing is a full treatment system, and it doesn't need to be laser targeted on in the event. If you have an event, it's okay, pre, during, and post. This is what you can expect from us because we care that much about your outcomes, and we want your end goal to be the same end goal, so it's unified. Normalize it. I feel like, to your point, Audrey, sometimes people divert away from hitting on those things out of fear of the unknown. And I can also very much so resonate with you, and which goes back to the first story I told at the beginning of us speaking, is the more I had to ask questions and wonder what if, the lower my confidence fell. And more, especially when, it does only take that one TikTok for immediately someone like myself to go look in the mirror to say, oh my goodness, do I see any level of, likeness in what I just saw? It's happening more and more. It's always right there in our face. So again, safety number one, that's been the theme of what we've been discussing here, but taking it seriously in terms of, it's okay to have a process and a protocol. And again, regulations will start calling for it at some point in time. So why not get ahead of the curve?
Yeah. And I agree with you. You said like, it's like this full treatment plan. So it's not like the treatment plan is not just the treatment services and what's actually physically being done on the patient. We need to think of it as this much larger concept that starts with the initial consultation and then moves forward post-treatment as well, in terms of follow-up, aftercare, and all of those other things. So obviously everything that we're talking about, it all comes down to the gap that was in the industry that obviously Coverwell has filled for. So I want to go into, because I know we've like kind of touched on Coverwell here and there, but I know our listeners are probably wondering like, okay, what is Coverwell? And just so our listeners know, like, I have no financial interest in Coverwell whatsoever. I just think that they're a really, really incredible company. And I think that they come with something that is very much needed in this industry. A lot of our patient now clients, hopefully you guys know, but we have an integration with them, and we did this for a reason because we believe in what they're doing. So I want you guys to go into Coverwell. What is it? What does it offer? How does it work? Because I know people are probably thinking about it.
Thank you. Yeah. So Coverwell, we created this safety net for med spas and med spa patients. And it protects everybody. It protects the medical director, it protects the injector, it protects the patient. And you protect your patient, you protect your business. That's our one of our statements. And what the goal, and Kandis said it before, if we can help people and make things more safe, that's what we want to do. And a lot of the spa industry are these mid-level spas. They're not board certified dermatologists or board certified plastic surgeons. The vast majority of people in the med spa space are the mid-levels, and that's where the vast majority of patients go to. And what we want to do is give those spas the ability to act like Nordstrom or Costco or Apple. So when someone comes in and they get, let's say, Juvederm or Botox or cool sculpting or some procedure, for a small percentage cost, you can add Coverwell to the price of that procedure. And then Coverwell is going to act like Apple Care for that procedure, to make it really simple. Yep. So if someone has an adverse event and they call the spa can direct them to Coverwell. And then we are going to triage that patient. We're going to help them get through that time of need, all the while explaining to them that they're so lucky to be at that spa because that spa brought us in for this specific event. It wasn't something that they had their head in the sand about. They were concerned about all their patients. And now this happened to you. We're going to get you through it.
Yeah. What is the typical percentage overall that like it would cost for a patient to add it on, or like a range?
Every spa is different, but we're averaging about 5% of the cost of the procedure. So if it's $100 worth of Botox, it would be $5.
Yep. And like when I hear that,
I'm sorry, you get $125,000 worth of benefits.
Okay, cool. So 125K worth of benefits, and then average, obviously every practice differs, but average around 5%. Okay. If I'm a patient and I'm thinking of this now, like 5% is very, very minimal to me. Like especially in this industry, like it's our face, it's our body, it's our skin, it's our health, like all like these things that are so immensely valuable to us as human beings. Like for an extra 5%, like I would do that all day, every day for every single procedure. Something else I know people are wondering this because I get this question. I've heard it multiple times is, so if a practice has Coverwell, so let's just say it's 5%, can that be just baked into the cost of treatment and perhaps the provider just increases the cost of treatment, or is it typically an optional add-on that the patient has to decide to add on?
So we've moved to a model that we're asking for the spas to have 100% compliance and to mandate it on every procedure. Because what that does for the spa, it allows them to know, as of August 1st, everybody who comes in the door is going to have Coverwell. And our plan is only for 30 days. So if a complication or an adverse reaction, adverse event happens in those 30 days, that's when the coverage period is. So we want to have 100% compliance. And then as far as how they bill it, that's really up to the spa. The spa can put it on as a line item, or they can not put it on and just show everybody that they get Coverwell every time it's purchased. It's kind of like when you buy tires at Firestone. You can't ask Firestone to not include the warranty on the tires.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I love that you guys have moved to like 100% compliance model because every patient is different. Every treatment is different and things happen. And for this extra, it's not even a ton of effort to add Coverwell on either. It's a relatively super simple thing to do. The practice can just really have sound mind to know that they're protecting their patients and protecting their business, which is what exactly you, Pat, you said, like our motto is like to protect the patient. And then if you do that, you protect the business. So I love it. I think it's a brilliant product. It's obviously very much needed in this space. So I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are probably wondering, how do we learn more? Where can they go? Who can they reach out to? So I'll let you guys kind of let our listeners where they can go to find more information.
Absolutely. So they can go to www.coverwell.co and you can read about everything that we provide on our website, and there is a button you just press. It takes you to a very simple, I think there's only a few fields that you provide us with your basic information, and then we'll reach out and answer absolutely any questions that you may have. Whether you're the medical director, practice manager, or the owner yourself. Again, we take the responsibility upon ourselves to continue to educate and answer questions, just as we would hope that you're doing your patients. So there's never a bad question. And we just want to make sure that, again, we're helping strengthen the credibility of the space overall. And that's just a trickle down effect from there.
Yeah.
And we have some cool collateral that we can give to the spa. We can give them like a nice certification for their website and a badge for their door, and just raise awareness that they have Coverwell involved in their practice. And what we want to do is really raise the level of professionalism in the spa world by helping them to be more compliant with the informed consents, the waivers, and the education of the clients.
Yeah. I love it. And I love how you put it, to raise the level of professionalism. So yeah, I strongly encourage everyone who's listening. They're a great company with really good people, as you can probably already tell. But I definitely encourage reaching out to Coverwell and just being more proactive with your business to get ahead, while honestly other practices are probably not even thinking about this. So strongly encourage you all to reach out to Coverwell. Thank you, Kandis. Thank you, Pat, for coming on the True to Form podcast. It's always great to see you guys and see your lovely faces and spend some time together. So I very much am grateful. And of course, on behalf of Patient Now, we're super excited about our integration in the system as well. But I want to thank you both for carving out some time on a Tuesday and coming on the True to Form podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey.
Thanks for having us, Audrey. We appreciate you.